Bava Kamma, Daf Mem Gimel. We begin with the last two lines in Daf Mem Beis. We're discussing a statement of Rabbi Akiva, which seems to be contradicted, and how we're going to resolve it. So the two brises are as follows. On the one hand, Rabbi Akiva says that a man inherits his wife's property after she dies, and all the rules of inheritance seem to apply just like they apply to a Bechor. When a Bechor gets a second chelek, when he gets Pishnaim, the same rules apply to when a husband inherits his wife. And the contradictory brisa to that is what we're about to bring in here, which shows that a man does not inherit nizikin that's owed to his wife. If she was injured or damaged and someone owes her for that, and then she dies, the husband doesn't collect that. Instead, her own inheritors, her children, if she has her own, collect that from her. It doesn't go to her husband. The Gemara says that is contradictory. What would the reason for that be? The Gemara has already discussed how for kaifer that makes sense, because kaifer is something which is not the property of the woman while she's alive. She's only owed it once she dies, and therefore she never had it for her husband to be yerush from her, and instead it goes to her children. But the Gemara now shows that by nizikin, other types of nizikin, not kaifer, the same thing applies. And if she were to have nizikin owed to her, and then she dies before she collects it, then it would go to her inheritors and not to her husband. So where do you see that? That's the Gemara quotes the brisa that discusses what happens if a man strikes a woman, not his wife, but he strikes a woman and causes her to miscarry. At the same time, there's nezik, there's tsar, there's boishes, there's all kinds of things. So the law over there is that the nezik and the tsar are paid to the woman. The value of the miscarried fetuses, those are paid to the husband. Now, they each have their own inheritors for this. If the husband, if he dies, his inheritors inherit that. The woman, if she dies, her inheritors inherit that, not the husband. If each of them don't have inheritors, like if they are an Eved or a Shivcha that was freed, or they are a guy that was misguided, it's the only situation in which a person could have no inheritors at all, then no one inherits it, no one takes possession of it, it becomes Hefker, and the man who owes it doesn't have to pay it because he's the one who's holding it, and therefore he's the one who's Zeicha in the Hefker. But we see from there is that even for regular Hezek, a woman is married to her children and not to her husband, and that contradicts the general halacha that a woman is married to her husband. So how do you answer that? So Rabba and Rav Nachman answer that we must be discussing when she's divorced and she has no husband. But if she had a husband, then it would go to him. Now the Gemara asks that if she's divorced, why would the husband get the right to the miscarried? Why would that money go to him? She's alone. She should be able to keep that. So Gemara answers that Rav Papa says the Torah was mezakeh, the value of fetuses, to the father, even if the father is not the woman's husband, even if it was a bias znus. The Torah says, Kasher Yashes of Baal Ha'isha from Lashon Boel, the one that was Boel, her, and inspired these children, and therefore it goes to him, even if they're divorced, even if he's never married her in the first place. Now there's another question, which is we should have a different answer. Why do we have to say that she was divorced and had no husband? We'd give a different answer, and we could say that this nizikin that is owed is in the category, it's owed in a way that it's considered to be roi and not muchzik. So we're going to need some background information here on the concept of inheritance. So in the sugi of inheritance in Perkei Shneichel, we speak about when does a bechor take pishnaim, and what property of the father does he get a double share. And those halachas, as we said, also apply to when the husband inherits his wife. So we have a number of different levels of how much something can be considered to be part of the estate of the father who died. It could be muhsik, something he's already in control of, he's already holding. A level less than that is if it's a loan which he lent someone that is owed to him, that's what we call a milveh. A level beyond that is if the property grew in value after he died. That is, this is money that was added to the estate after the death, but unlike a loan, it wasn't owed, it just came on its own. Now, a level beyond that, very similar to that, a level beyond that is ribis, that is interest, that is paid, obviously from someone who is mutter to pay interest, like a guy. The interest that is paid on the loan that he made, again, that is, could potentially be involved or not. And then the weakest thing is a kaifer, which can't even be owed at all until he dies. Now, what are the halachas over here? So, muhsik, something which the father is already in his possession, and the bechor, it definitely takes pishayim from that. Milveh, so that's already discussion, something which is owed. It's a discussion between Rebbe, the Rabbanon, and Bnei Marava, which we shall see. But they all say that Milva, the Bachar, takes Bishnayim on, something which is owed to him. And we'll have to see why. There'll be different reasons as to why. Now, as far as the Shevach, the increased value, that is already a machlekes. Rebbe there says that the Bachar takes Bishnayim, and the Rabbanan say the Bachar does not take Bishnayim. Ribbis is also a machlekes. Rebbe, again, same shita, says that the Bachar takes Bishnayim. Here, opposing him is the Bnei Marava. They hold like the Rabbanon about the Shevach. So Ribbis and Shevach are very similar machlekes, and in both of them, Rebbe holds the Bachar takes Bishnayim. In both of them, the opposing opinion holds that they do not, and the opposing opinions agree with each other. It's the Rabbanon and the Bnei Marava. As far as Kaifer goes, everybody agrees that they do not take Bishnayim, as we mentioned in the end of the last sugya. Now, what we have there then is an interesting situation where, according to the Rabbanan and the Bnei Marava, the Bachar takes Bishnayim from the Milveh, but not from the Shavach or the Ribbis. So what would be the reason for that? And how do you define that? So here you have a Machlekes Rabbah and Rav Nachman. Machlekes Amoraim, how to explain these Tanaim. Machlekes Amoraim is when we say that the Bachar takes Bishnayim from the Milveh, how is that? What type of payment did they collect this milva? Obviously, we're discussing if they take Bishnayim or not. We're talking about where the money came in at some point, and they're dividing it up. So how is the money collected? And so they argue, this Bishnayim, is that where they collected money, cash, or where they collected land? So according to Rabbah, you would only take Bishnayim from a milva if they collected land, because there was a shibud on the land, and I can view it as if the father already owned it, because he had a lien on it. Money, there was no lien. This is not the same money he lent out. It's other money. Money is lohitzan, and no money is spent, and then you pay back other. So therefore, money he did not have, was not part of his rishus at the time that he died, even though it was owed. And if that's what was collected, then the Bechor would not take Bishnayim of that. Rav Nachman, however, says the opposite. He says if the collection was money, so the father had lent the money, so this is the money that he lent. It may not be the same coin, but it's the same money, so it's coming back. And therefore, the Bechor would take Bishnayim of that. Karka is not what he lent, it's something new, and therefore he doesn't take Bishnayim of that. So anyways, what we see here is that in an existing obligation, which could be a loan, or could be like our case, where a hezek happened and that is owed. So according to Rabbah, if they collected money, it would be roy, and the Bechor wouldn't have a right to it. And the same law applies that the husband would not have a right to it. According to Rav Nachman, that is true as if it was land. Now, Rabbi and Rav Nachman are the two ones here who said that our case, the only one that makes sense, the reason the husband is not collecting is because there is no husband, he's divorced. And the question more asks is, why did they have to say that? Why don't they just say, according to Rabbah, say we're talking about where they collected money, and therefore it wouldn't go to the Bechor, therefore it doesn't go to the husband. And let Rav Nachman say we're talking about where he collected karka, land, and therefore it wouldn't go to the Bechor, it wouldn't go to the husband. So that's the Gemara's kasha. A bit complex, that's what the Gemara asks. The Gemara answers, because that whole machlekes is only the opinion of the Bnei Marava and the Rabbanon, who hold that you don't collect from the Shevach. You don't collect from increased value that came on its own. And therefore, this increase, if I view the money that came in as not having been owed, and each one argue, do you view the cash as this is not what was owed? Do you view the land as this is not what was owed? This is not what was lent, this is not what was owed. So there you could argue about it, and that's where their whole discussion is. However, they want to explain that this brayso is in the opinion of Rebbe, who Rebbe holds that mochsek, milveh, shevach, ribbis, all these things, the Bechor gets Bishnayim, and the husband should inherit, and therefore none of those explanations will work, and we're going to have to go with that she was divorced. Okay, the Gemara now moves on to another sugya. Two halachas brought by Reish Lakish. He says that when the Torah describes the payment that a shar who kills a person needs to pay, so for an eved it's 30 shkalim, and for a ben chayrin it is kaifer, which is evaluated. There's some machlokas about that, as we've seen. Both of those, the pasuk links them to the shar receiving skila. As far as the eved, it says keser shleshim shkalim yitin la'alein v'asher yisakel. As far as ben chayrin, it says hashar yisakel v'gam ba'al yumas, and yumas is im kaifer yushas olav. So only for the kaifer. So therefore the two are linked. Only if the shar gets skila do the owners have to pay the shleshim shel eved or the kaifer. The shar, says Reish Lakish, does not get skila if he killed shalei b'kavana. He was not intending to kill a person, and therefore, in the case where he's not intending to kill a person, the owner would not have to pay the shleshim shel eved, would not have to pay kaifer either. Now, the source that the shar doesn't get skila if he killed Shalei B'Kavana is that we'll see on the next daf. So the Gemara says Abaye has to kashan this from a brisa. The brisa says that if someone comes and he says my ox killed a person or killed another shar, he still needs to pay. It doesn't say what he has to pay, but he has to pay. Now here there's no skila because just like a person can't get skila, he doesn't get misa if he admits. A shar also doesn't get skila if the owner admits. So here where he's moide, there is no skila. Therefore, according to the halacha, Rosh Hashanah said, whenever there's no skila, there's no kaifer, you shouldn't have to pay. Why does it say here that you do have to pay? There's no kaifer. So the Gemara says, you're right, there's no kaifer, because no kapara is needed, because he's moided. We're not talking about kaifer here. We're talking about paying for the damages. You have to pay for the damages. If you're not paying kaifer, there's still nezikin to pay. The Gemara asks, if we're talking about restitution of the nezikin and not the kaifer, so the why in the next part of the brisa does it say that if someone comes in, he admits, my ox killed someone else's eved, that he doesn't have to pay because moide is pater. Moide is only pater for a kanas, for a kaifer and kanas shalavet. If we're not talking about that, if we're talking about the real nezikin, he should have to pay even if he's moide. So the Gemara says that he responded, or Shlakish responded, and he said, I could have answered you, not a kasha. The Reisha is talking about Nezikin, and the Sefer is talking about Knas. However, that would be a forced answer, and we don't answer forced answers. So instead, I'm going to tell you both of them, Reish and Sefer, are really talking about the Nezikin, the financial restitution. We're not talking about Knas. Why then, in the Sefer, do you not need to pay Nezikin? So the Gemara explains there's a difference between a Ben Chayrin, which we're talking in the Reisha, and an Eved, which we are talking in the Sefer. And that difference plays into whether you pay Nezikin when there is no kaifer or knas or not. And the difference is as follows. In the case of the Ben Chayrin, there is a potential situation where he could be moide and still be chayiv to pay the kaifer. And what is that? That's if we know that his ox gored and killed somebody, we just don't know if it was a tam or if it was a muad. It makes a big difference because the tam wouldn't be chayiv to pay kaifer. Then he comes and he admits that it was a muad, and therefore it's chayiv the kaifer. That's moed b'kanas, and he's chayiv to pay it anyway because we have witnesses that he gored. We know he would get skila. He gets skila anyway, because the witnesses know that the goring happened. He gets skila whether he's a tam or muad. All he did was admit that he owes the kaifer. In a case like that, he'll be chayiv that kaifer. Now, therefore, because in that case he's chayiv the kaifer, if there's no witnesses, so it's a real moide, and we haven't established on our own, and he comes and he admits that the killing happened, so there he would have to pay nezikin. However, in the case of the Eved, where it's a knas and it's not a kaifer, so if the goring happened, and we didn't know if it was a tam or if it was an Eved, and he came and he admitted that it was a muad, not a tam, and therefore it's chayev d'shleishim shel Eved, there he would be pater. He would not have to pay knas in that case because that's a real moide b'knas. It's not a moide b'kaifer, it's a moide b'knas. Since he would be pater in that case, where there are no edim, and he comes and he admits on his own, where he's pater for knas, he's also pater from nezikin. Now, what we've just said is that there's a difference between a ben chayrin and an eved as far as paying nezikin when there is no knas or kaifer. And the Gemara challenges that there is no difference between the two. Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, the Gemara says, asked that we have a brisa that says that anybody who is chayev by a ben chayrin to pay kaifer is chayev to pay it by an eved as well. And we're asked, there is no kaifer by an eved. So what's it referring to? It must be referring to the nezikin. And it's showing that in any situation where you would pay for ben chayrin, you have to pay for an eved, you have to pay nezikin. So don't tell me that there's a difference. So the Gemara says the answer was brought either by him himself or by a rabbah, that this brayso is not referring to moed b'knas. It's not referring to where he admitted it. It's referring to where there are edim. And it's saying whenever there are edim, the halachos of a Evan and a ben chayrin are the same. If there is edim and it's b'kavana, so then you have to pay kaifer for the ben chayrin. You have to pay shleishim shel knas for the Eved. If it's shaloi b'kavana, so then you don't pay any of those. So you pay nezikin for each of them. So in the case where you have edim, and that's what we're talking about, we're comparing edim to edim. In the case where you have edim, they're the same. Moed b'knas are different, and we're not talking about that. Okay, so now Rava asks, Rava says, hold on a second, you're telling me a chiddush, you're telling me that there's a payment of nezikin when there's no knas of Eved and there's no kaifer, there's a payment of nezikin, and that's true. So the same thing should apply not only by Shar, it should apply by Eish. If somebody kills a ben chayrin or an Eved with an Eish, he should have to pay nezikin. Now, That would only make sense if it was shaloi b'kavana. If it would be b'kavana, he'd be chayiv misa because it's murder. So shaloi b'kavana, if his eish, which is property according to one shita, if his eish kills a ben chayr neman, he should have to pay nizikin. Why does he not? So the Gemara says, how does Rav indeed know that he does not have to pay nizikin? So we try a few sources. First, we bring a Mishnah that says, what happens if somebody set fire to a pile of grain, a gadish, a kid goat, a yidi, and to an eved. So it depends who could have run away. And the Mishnah gives the following set of halachas. If the yidi was tied up, so he couldn't have run away, and the eved was not tied up, so the eved could have run away. So the halacha is, he's pater for the eved because the eved should have fled. Since he's pater for the eved, he could be chayiv on the other things, and therefore he's chayiv on the gidi and on the gadish. Now, however, if the eved was tied up and the gidi was untied, so he's pater on the gidi because the gidi should have run away. He's pater on the eved, and here's the question why. And he's also pater on the gadish. Now, what's the reason here? Now, the simplest explanation would have been, Kamli b'Ravmine, the eved couldn't flee. He killed the eved by setting fire to the gadish, and therefore he's chayiv for the murder, and therefore he should be pater for the gadish. Now, the problem with this pshat, the Gemara says, is that Rava holds Eshim Mimoinoi, and therefore it's not considered like he did it himself, and he wouldn't be chayiv misa for the eved. So you can't say Kamli b'Ramine. So what does the pshat have to be? Someone wants to suggest, so maybe the pshat is because of this, because of what we're saying here. There's no nizikin for killing an eved if the similar situation wouldn't have knas by shar hamud. So since this is shaloi b'kavana, so if it would be a shar hamud, he wouldn't have knas. So therefore there's no nizikin on the eved. That's what the Gemara wants to say, must be the pshat over here, and therefore that's the makar. So the Gemara answers, well, we've already said what the pshat here is, and this is not the pshat. The pshat is that the cases where he didn't set fire to the gadish, he set fire directly to the eved. That's not a case of Eishai, that's a case of murder. And therefore there is kamli b'Ramini, and that's why he's pater. So, what then is the source of Rav's assumption that you don't pay for Eisha Shalei B'Kavana, you don't pay Nezikin? So the Gemara says maybe it's from something else. Maybe it's from a brayso that lists compares bar to Eish, and says that an Eish is more chomer than the bar. In what way? That in Eish you're responsible whether it destroys something which is roila or something which is ein roila, but a bar is not responsible for something which is ein roila. It's not responsible for kalim. Now, why don't you say a different thing? Say that by Eish you pay if you do nizikin shalei b'kavana, but the bar doesn't pay shalei b'kavana because the bar doesn't pay for an adam at all. A bar, if a person falls into a bar, it says shar v'lei adam, you're not chai for that. So why don't you say, therefore, why do we not list this reason? Obviously, it's not true, which would mean that for your eish, you would not have to pay if you killed somebody shalei b'kavana. The Gemara says this couldn't be the source because maybe that reason's true too. It was just a ton of ishir. We only listed one reason. We don't have to list every single way in which eish is more chomer. So, in the light of this, the Gemara adjusts what Rava said. The Gemara says Rava wasn't asking a kasha, Rava was asking a question. He had a shayla. What is the halacha? Do we say that an eish is like a shar? Do we say that just like the situation of a shar, when it's shalei b'kavana, he doesn't pay kaifer, but he does pay nezikin? So, would you say the same thing by an eish, that when it's shalei b'kavana, he also has to pay nezikin? Now, the difference being that by an eish there's no kaifer. So by a shar, where it's shalei b'kavana, you're taking kaifer off, so now the nezikin can come forward. Would you say that by an eish, even though there's no kaifer, you would still have to pay nizikin in the case of shalei b'kavana? Gemara concludes, Teku, the question remains, we don't have an answer. Okay, the Gemara now notes that when Avdimi came from Eretz Yisrael, Rav Yechanan argues on Rabbah, and he says that in the case of shalei b'kavana, you would pay kaifer. And he learns it out of a pasuk. He says, when it says, im kaifer yushas olav, what's the im? Im seems like an extra word. That is to include a case of shalei b'kavana. So Mar says on that, Abaye asked, the word im appears in discussing the shalishim shel eved as well. It says im eved yiga chasharai amma. So what's that im for? You're telling me that im has to be for something. What's that for? Maybe you'll say it's for an eved shalei b'kavana, that you have to pay shalishim shel for an eved shalei b'kavana as well. So the Gemara says you can't say that because Rish Lakish already said that because he doesn't get skila, he doesn't have to pay shalishim shel eved. So Gemara says, okay, that was Rish Lakish. Rav Yechanan disagrees. You can't ask a contradiction from Rish Lakish on Rav Yechanan. And in fact, the Gemara says when Ravin came and said in the name of Yechanan, this exact drasha, im eved, the extra im is to include that you pay shleishim shel eved even if it's shalei bekavana on the shar. Now, what does Rish Lakish hold? So the Gemara notes that Rish Lakish obviously holds that there is no drasha of im by the eved because he holds that you don't pay shleishim shel eved if it was shalei bekavana. What about im kaifer? So Gemara says there he does say the drasha. He says the drasha of Yechanan said im kaifer is to include shalei bekavana. What's the difference? How come im kaifer for the ben chayrin you do include you pay kaifer shalei bekavana, but for the eved you don't? The Gemara answer is very simple. The im in context makes sense in the case of the eved. It doesn't make sense in the case of the ben chayrin. In the case of the eved, it's written in the situation of the describing the goring that happened. So the goring you have to say, and if, however, this is the case that happened. So you need the word there. However, when you're discussing the tashlumin, you say im kaifer. What does that make sense? You're in the middle of the story. You're not bringing a new story. You're not adding a variable to the story. So therefore, it doesn't make sense, and it is therefore a drasha.